Hey all, here at OS Reviews. About a year ago, we checked out a pretty cool laser starlight projector, which I thought works really well, but over the past few weeks with the holiday shopping season, I became aware that there's actually quite a few versions of these lights floating around, and the model that we see here is kind of an upgraded version that might be the best Aura or Galaxy projector yet. The premise of what it does is still very similar to what we saw from before, but this time around it has a 4000 milliamp hour capacity rechargeable battery, which means that it can operate when unplugged for up to 10 hours. The previous model did not have a built-in battery, so this is going to be pretty convenient if you want to just pop it into somewhere that's a little bit further away from an outlet, for example. It doesn't have to be always plugged in, has a slightly upgraded, slimmer design, and also the laser now comes in two colors. Both green and red lasers are built on in, versus all of the other models we've seen in the past only had a green colored laser. I will say though that this model does not have a built-in speaker, unlike the previous model. So you win some, you also lose a little bit. If you already are listening to music from your phone, or if you have another Bluetooth speaker, you're not losing out on too much. Other slight changes include a docking station which is magnetic and allows you to prop it at various angles and tilt it upwards more flexibly, versus before it was pretty much always pointing upwards at the ceiling and that was it. So this is going to be a lot more flexible in terms of the angle that you can adjust it to. And on the inside we have the projector light itself. We have a quick user guide that tells you the specs here. So the green and the red lasers, also tells you the class of the laser. And then we've got our accessories, including the aforementioned magnetic base or dock, along with a USB Type-C charging cable. Great to see this being used. Last but not least, there is also a included AC adapter, which is a pretty nice bonus. It can of course work when you are plugged in and charging at the same time. The build quality definitely seems a bit more solid than the version we had from before. It is still made out of polycarbonate plastic, but it is something that feels a little bit more rigid and higher quality versus last time it was a bit more hollow. So even though side by side I wouldn't say it's too big of a difference, it is a little bit slimmer. So we see the two grills here for the individual red and green laser beams, and the center here is what's casting the LED nebula or galaxy effect. And then on top here we have all of the touch controls. The base here has kind of a tilt to it, so even if you set it down flat like this, it's still going to be pointing upwards a little bit, although the charging port is located on the base. So it's a little bit strange. If you're charging it, ideally you would want to put it onto a dock so it doesn't get covered up. If you're putting it down like this, it might be hard to plug in at the same time. So if you just set it down, it will just kind of stick itself into place, and it's quite tight. Now it will give you a more ergonomic angle in this portrait view instead. It works equally as well, and we can also further tilt the angle back and forth if you want to put it onto the ceiling by tapping on this main key here for a few seconds. Obviously we're going to have to turn this off to get you the most amazing effect. It already looks really dazzling, especially in person with all of these different lights. Again, we have both the red and the green lasers on this particular variant, and in the auto transition mode it will essentially go through all the colors of the nebula clouds one at a time, so it keeps on changing, and even the laser beams are slowly spinning towards the right. As you can see there, it's not completely static, so there is a motor in here, but it is very quiet. In fact, you can't really hear anything at all, even if you're putting it close to the microphone of your camera. So it doesn't really produce any background noise. Now, if we want to pop it onto the dock here, so I'm going to just pop it along, and now in this orientation you can see it works equally as well. There really is no difference in the effect, just because the kind of nebula cloud is always in this almost circular shape, so it doesn't really matter what orientation it's in. And then same thing with all of the stars, it will now just be moving upwards instead of to the right. Like I said though, the overall coverage area of this nebula cloud is not going to be as large or diverse as the laser beams, which will stretch for a bigger surface area, can cover, let's say, entire ceiling plus some extra walls, versus this, which is only going to be one region towards the center. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But again, overall looks really dazzling, especially if we kind of zoom in. It does look very convincingly like ocean waves or nebula cloud waves, and again, all the laser beams, some which are surprisingly a little bit brighter than others, also creates a really convincing effect. You can definitely stare at this thing and just watch it become mesmerized. The overall effect of all of these galaxy lights are quite similar, but I will say this one does seem to be a little bit brighter. So cycling through some of the other effects here, I can tap on the top and that will pause the oscillation for everything. So it will just give you a static image, and I can tap on it once again to resume. The one here on the right will basically toggle the laser beams on and off. So now we have just the red laser beams. Also is looking quite good, I have to say. And if I tap on it again, it will bring back the green colored ones. If I tap on the one on the left hand side, it will turn off the red colored lasers instead and only give us the green. Out of red and green, I have to say green is still probably my favorite light, but overall, I'm still glad to see that there is the presence of both of those effects. You can also turn everything off altogether and only have the nebula cloud, and this also is quite cool. So this is a little bit more soft and gentle because not quite as bright as the laser lights, but definitely still is very mesmerizing and pretty to look at nonetheless. So you can definitely play around with these settings if you want to turn on or off kind of individual modes and so on and so forth. Have a bit of fun there. Now finally, the one here on the bottom here will turn off the nebula cloud, so it gives you only the laser lights, which again is just very dazzling, almost mesmerizing in fact if you are looking at it closely. And once again, you can turn on and off individual colors. Now, the remote control, though, does give us slightly more granular controls, so if I want to go to a specific color of the nebula cloud, it's a little easier to just use this to point at it. The speed of the motor to make it faster or slower, that is one feature which is exclusive to the remote. So right now we have made it kind of oscillate a bit more quickly, as you can see there, versus I can also slow down the action considerably just by pressing on the remote there. So that is one thing that you can't do directly on the touch buttons of the unit itself. One other thing here is the ability to go through different transition effects, whether it's fading or it's going to be a more abrupt flash between the colors. You can also change between that. Easier to put into pretty much any position around the house, indoors, or even a little bit outdoors if you're trying to entertain guests for a party, let's say. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on review, again, of this really cool laser light aura projector. The idea itself is nothing new. It's been around for a while now, but glad to see these small incremental differences and improvements. And this remains, again, a really solid option, especially with the aforementioned upgrades and pretty solid overall construction. So you can check out more details if interested, but for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews.